Welcome, everyone. This is the last week of the Coacharya Virtual Global Conference, as you guys know, Awake, Aware, Arise. And I'm really pleased to be here with everyone today. And my fellow panelists are David McConney, Malini Shah, and Rebecca Tenkredi. I'm calling them out as I see them on the screen. And welcome everyone, and sorry about the delay, but the good news is this will get recorded, and so you'll have the opportunity, others will also have the opportunity to watch it again later. So the topic for today that we wanted to share with you, share our experiences, lived experience of our own lived experience, and also that of others within our families and communities. And we wanted to talk about the opportunity to reshape the immigrant human experience with cultural intelligence. Sounds like a mouthful. And we're going to use the next about, I would say 70, 75 minutes to kind of unpack uh, what we mean by this and why we want to talk about this today. A quick round of introductions. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm based here in Ashburn, Virginia, on the East Coast of the United States. I'm the founder and principal of North Star Solutions and Services, which is a professional coaching, consulting, and training consultancy. And with me today here are David McConney, who's also based outside of the Washington, D.C. area on the East Coast as well. Malini, who's based in Texas in the United States. So just an hour time difference, right? Both you and Rebecca. Rebecca is based in Chicago. And the reason why we chose to come together to talk about this topic, we'll get into that in a minute. And just wanted to kind of do a quick overview as well. So people have moved uh, over the ages, and that's something that humans have always done for all sorts of reasons. And however, today, in today's times, given the current global situation and the socio-economic and socio-political environments around the world, and not to mention the pandemic, uh, what's bubbled up to the surface is not just our interconnectedness, but also the vast disparities that we all experience, and that's become part of human experience around the world. And so, just for some context, I wanted to share some numbers. So, according to the United Nations, as of 2019, at the end of 2019, more than 272 million people live in a country outside, other than the country of origin or birth. And then we also have the highest number of globally displaced people at 18, and that number stood at 70 million, 70 million. That's the highest since World War II. So this is the global landscape in terms of immigration or migration. And then given the pandemic, that has added about 3 million people who are stranded. So they are not yet in their their destination. They're stranded because of travel restrictions, because of COVID. So this is where we are. And so what emerges from this is this whole kind of spectrum of choice versus circumstance, from making that decision of moving to another state or another country other than from where we were born or our place of origin. And what happens in experience depending on whether you move because of choice or because of circumstance. We wanted to look at that, and we also wanted to kind of look at our own experiences, our own individual experiences, to see um, the element of that push and pull between trying to assimilate and integrate with in the adoptive country or environment or culture, and then the need to also stay connected with our roots. What happens to the immigrant human experience in that? So our goal today is really kind of unpack the immigrant experience, but from a from the perspective of humanity. And then we wanted to look at that from three different. So one common thing among the panelists today is that all of us, including Magda, we are based in the United States. So a large part of our immigrant experience is North American in context. However, there are differences in terms of, so for example, David and I, we ourselves are immigrants, whereas Rebecca, it was her, I believe her grandfather, right, Rebecca, who emigrated, or many generations ago. Yeah.
No, all four grandparents. So
all four grandparents, right?
Yeah,
right.
They all immigrated. Yeah.
Right. And Malini, it was her parents who emigrated here, and Malini is first generation American. Magda, her family emigrated to the U.S. when Magda was was 12. So this is the background that we're all coming from, and we wanted to unpack the immigrant experience from these different perspectives. The other thing we wanted to look at is how the why, what, and how of cultural intelligence. What does that mean, and how can we use that to really uplift this human experience as from an immigrant perspective? We also wanted to look at uh, what from the world of coaching can we bring, and how can a coaching mindset help us in uplifting this experience, and we wanted to kind of do this in the context of the world of work and business. So that's the overarching uh, objective here. So with that in mind, if I may, um, I just have a quick question for the audience, and please feel free to respond via chat. And the question is, and I'm going to use a technique that I actually learned in one of the sessions, the Coacharya sessions here, and it's called Chatterfall. So I'm going to ask you a question, and please hold on to your responses. Type your responses. Do not hit enter. Hit enter when I say so, and we'll be able to see all the responses together. Yeah. So the question is, what does the word immigrant bring up for you? Please type your response, 1 or 2 words. Keep it ready. And then once I say go, hit the enter key. All right. So the question is, what does the word immigrant bring up for you? You have 30 seconds. So a couple of words. What does the word immigrant bring up for you? Okay, go. Wow. So change, new circumstance, diversity, hardworking. Change, new circumstance, diversity, and good food. That's a good one. That's true too. Optimism, missing the roots. Somewhere else, another location, another culture. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. So before we get started, before I start my first question for Rebecca, I had another question, and this is you got to choose what option applies to you. So I have a question in terms of what's your background. So like I shared, David and we ourselves are immigrants here. Malini's parents emigrated here, etc. So we wanted to understand what your background is. So there are 4 options. Just type the number in response, the number associated with the option. So 1 is my ancestors emigrated to this country years or generations ago. 2, my parents emigrated when I was born here. 3, I'm an immigrant. 4, I've never left my country of origin. Okay, so we have a few immigrants. Then we have 1 or 2 first generation folks, and then a couple of people that continue to live in their country of origin. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So, with that background, I'd like to start off, and my first question is for Rebecca. So, a little more by way of introduction. Rebecca and I, we are part of the Coacharya community, and we have been in the same coach training class, and we've also collaborated on a few passion projects prior to this. Rebecca is a leadership coach, and her background is very unique in that it's in corporate HR and nonprofit leadership. And Rebecca has been the founding director of the Chicago office and the vice president of programs for a US-based charity, nonprofit called Upwardly Global. And she spent more than a decade there and she and her team have helped thousands of newcomers to the US get reconnected back with their careers that they used to have in their home countries. So it's a very rich experience that Rebecca's had in this space. So, earlier, as we alluded to, Rebecca, so your grandparents emigrated to the U.S., right, and all from Italy.
Yes.
So, can you talk to us more about how, if at all, that has shaped your perspective on immigration in the U.S. context?
Sure. So, my grandparents came for economic opportunity. It was the early 1900s. Both of my grandfathers were born in poor villages in southern Italy. My grandfather on my dad's side had a third grade education, and he was one of, I think, 17 or 18 children. So it was, not a great situation. And he came to the US because he could work, he could earn money, and he could raise a family with more opportunity than would have happened in southern Italy at the time. So, the way it has shaped my experience and my perception of immigration is that immigration is about, taking a leap of faith, being optimistic, taking advantage of opportunity, doing better for yourself, but always with an eye on the opportunity for your kids and your grandkids. And that was so true in my family. And, it's interesting because my grandparents and my parents were very intent on us integrating into the US. They wanted us to speak English. My parents spoke Italian, but they didn't teach us Italian. So in some ways, they were pushing us to be more and more Americanized. And in some ways, it was a different message. You hold on to certain aspects of Italian culture. So when it came to food, we were Italian. When it came to how we interacted and treated our family and put our family first, we were very Italian. When it came to education, they wanted us to be American. We were a family of girls. I have lots of girl cousins. There's 5 sisters in my family. They wanted us to take advantage of the educational opportunities that existed in the US and specifically not to be held back from education because we were women. So I saw it as a mixture of bringing your culture and not letting go of the things that you loved about your culture, but also embracing a new culture and taking advantage of the things that would help your family.
A lot of what you said resonates with me. So I'm originally from India, and I've moved around a lot in India. And for those of us on the call that are from India and others who are familiar with India, you would know that each state is different, and each state has its own language, its food and culture. And so if you cross state lines, you may as well be in a different country from that perspective. And I've had a lot of that experience, having lived in the south and the north and the west of the country. And I grew up with that. So my parents, so even though I've spent half my life in my own country of origin and birth, the aspirations that my parents had were the same. So always the focus was always on education, and they made sure that I went to an English medium school. Instruction was in English, so that I didn't have challenges in continuing my education. And so I missed out on a lot of, now I miss having that access to ancient wisdom from my own culture, because English has become my first language. I do speak other Indian languages, but I don't have the same level of comfort in comprehension. So a lot of that, resonated with me, and it's interesting that I had all this experience just within my own country. That's interesting, and it's I want to actually um, ask Malini about if you had any, uh, what part of that resonated with you, if any, before I go ahead and do a formal introduction for you, Malini.
Yeah, hi, Meenakshi and everyone. Thanks for hosting this panel. It's just such an important discussion that we're having today. I think the majority of what Rebecca said and the majority of what you said, Meenakshi, have rung true in my life, even as an immigrant's daughter. And I can probably back up and say, immigration has been a fundamental part of my family's DNA for, the past 3 generations. So while I, was born and raised in this country, my maternal grandparents, they were in India and they actually emigrated to Africa in the 1950s. And that was to seek a better economic opportunity at the time with the British Civil Service. And my grandfather, he was in education. And so he was able to move the family and go to Africa. There was a pretty large Indian community in Uganda at the time. So have a sense of community, but again, it was not their home country. So how they have to adapt and change was another adventure. And then of course, they had to actually move again due to the political situation at the time in Africa. So they ended up moving to Australia for that. And that was a country that welcomed them with open arms. And again, they were able to build and establish themselves in a new place. So I think starting from there, it's always been, kind of the attitude in my family as far as, where's the next economic opportunity and what do we need to do? And yes, I mean, definitely everything that you said, Rebecca, about preserving that identity, when it comes to food, we're Indian and we have certain expectations and customs that we do at home around food, even on the holidays that we celebrate and things like that. But then, yes, when it came to education, learning English was very important. And obviously speaking English, so it was not necessarily learning to speak it, but I think the cultural nuances of learning the language and translating into the culture here.
Right. So true. And so, just to introduce Malini formally to everyone, Malini and I met recently, again, a Coacharya connection, one of our cohort mates, and who introduced me to Malini, and we kind of hit it off. We felt like we had a lot of common ground, given that both of us are non-white women in business, and we share a few other. Other than our South Asian heritage, we also share some of what we're trying to do in this country as non-white women. So Malini is a leadership and executive coach with more than 15 years of experience in global supply chain strategy, business process transformation, and program management. So those were other aspects, particularly business process transformation, that's also common between the two of us. And Malini has many years of experience of working as a consultant and in-house for several of the world's largest technology organizations. And she has a lot of lived experience of working internationally in countries such as Mexico, Spain, Poland, and Brazil. And so, uh, given all of that, your background and your experience, Malini, um, I wanted to understand what's your perspective on immigration, given that you were born and raised here, and so you're first generation American. So when you think of yourself in terms of your identity, what comes up for you first? And can you tell us more about that?
Sure. And I think probably the other comment I would add to Rebecca's earlier comment was about the fact that immigration, there's an underlying sense of hope there. hope for a better opportunity. And so, that was always part of my family growing up. And so now, when I take that to understanding the experiences that I had, I think there was an increased sense of empathy for me growing up as I interacted with other immigrants that I went to school with and worked with on my teams, et cetera. So that was the first thing that I wanted to highlight. So the aspect of hope kind of translating to empathy. The other thing I would say is the empathy for immigrants growing up here in the cultural nuances. So whether it's learning a language, navigating political dynamics at work, and like that, I could always observe that with a little bit of a different lens because I had seen my own family go through that.
So, in terms of, is there something from your own experience growing up that stands out for you? That did most of your experience always remind you of being an immigrant?
I think yes and no. I always had that lens when I was out in the world, but we did assimilate into American culture quite well. Most of my friends were American growing up, and most of the celebrations and the way we celebrated birthdays and other quote unquote American holidays like Halloween's coming. That's not something we would typically celebrate. So from the aspect of integration and assimilation, I think for me that was fairly easy and fairly straightforward. The other thing I would say is there's probably, while I have assimilated quite well, it's always going to be slightly different for someone like me coming from India, where I might look different, even though I never actually lived in India, versus an immigrant from Europe or another country like that, where you kind of blend in several generations later.
Certainly. Thank you for sharing that. And that's kind of a nice segue into the next question, which is for our other panelist, David. So David and I, we work together. I've had the privilege of working under David's leadership for quite a few years, and I've in the process gained myself a mentor, and which continues, the mentorship continues to this day. So I'm very pleased to have you be a part of this today. So we also have collaborated on a few passion projects prior to this, and the latest one being a conversation series that David, his daughter, and I are doing together. It's on developing a multi-generational perspective on the future of work, given that the three of us represent three different generations among ourselves. So that's been a very, very interesting experience as well. So David has had a long international career in banking, fintech, and financial services, and also healthcare technology. To me, David is an embodiment of servant leadership, someone who has kind of perfected the art of collaborative leadership. He's all about building impactful teams and organizations by putting people first. So, and he's himself has had a very, multicultural lived experience that's personal and also in his work. So, David, you're originally from kind of originally from the Caribbean, with Scottish Irish ancestry, and you've lived in many parts of the world, and you are an immigrant in the U.S. So what I wanted to understand is your perspective, and it's kind of a two-part question. So your perspective on immigration in a North American context, because you've lived as an immigrant both in US and Canada. And then there's a bit of an intersectional lens that I want to bring in at a later point. So the first part of the question, your perspective, given your own experience on immigration.
Thanks, Mino, and thanks for including me in this important conversation. I guess as I reflect on this, I describe myself as an internationalist or a globalist or whatever term you want to choose, because of that background. So I was born in the Caribbean in Jamaica, and we were, I suppose, fortunate in many ways, and depending on your perspective, challenged in other ways from the point of view of moving a lot. My dad worked for a large international bank, and so we were constantly moving from place to place, because he was at a stage in his career when I was a young boy, that moves were important. It was an important part of progression through his career. And so as a consequence of that, I ended up being one of these boarding school boys. And that in itself, although not sort of completely an immigrant status, was definitely a status of an outsider looking in. So I went to school in Dublin, and there were aspects of that were really interesting in terms of how I was viewed by others, as this kid from the Caribbean, where people generally didn't know a lot about the Caribbean or about us. And so I was a bit of a unicorn in that sense. I had to try to fit in, as a 12, 13-year-old kid. That's an important part of your school experience. And so that was sort of one experience. And as I try to describe these things, I'm not trying to describe them in terms of the quality so much as the differences, because depending on your perspective, you can view them differently, right? I came to the US my first time around to attend university. And so in many ways, that also was the outsider looking in. But I guess I had the benefit at that stage of a more multicultural environment than most of the people I attended university with. I was in the Midwest, typically much more homogenous in terms of the population and so on. So again, I brought somewhat of a different experience, and I found in both instances pretty early in life that I became the sort of the bridge builder, right? The person who was able to talk about an experience growing up in Barbados or Jamaica, as opposed to the person who had lived their entire lives in the Midwest of the US or in the south of Ireland. And then really out of choice rather than circumstance. So I was blessed with the opportunity of being able to make the choice. Emigrated to Canada, and spent a number of years there. My wife is Canadian. My kids are both Canadian born. And the experience as an immigrant in Canada is, I think, quite different than the experience in the US. So there's no sort of North American variety. I find that there is this choice between that cultures make between integrating from an immigrant perspective or sort of maintaining a separate identity. For me, the Canadian experience was much more about providing for the separate identity. So it's not unusual to walk around Toronto and see a very, very multicultural type of environment. I find that the US is more of a melting pot. We've traditionally described ourselves that way. I think it's changed somewhat over the years, but I grew up with it as being that. And so those two differences really sort of cause differences in both the approach of the US or the Canadian person, and also the experience of the immigrant relocating to those two countries. So that was different. I mean, I have a sense of what I prefer in some ways and what I don't, but I'm going to reserve that preference and just really sort of focus on what I see as the differences. So, here I am in the US. we came here 17 years ago, and even then it was much around opportunity for our kids. So it sort of carried through the generations.
Right.
So
Thank you for sharing that. And what I'm observing here is what it doesn't matter what culture you come from, you're always kind of looking out for your future generation, for your kids and your grandkids, and that seems to be the theme. And then again, the other thing that I noticed is when you talk about moving to a different place, from and being afforded choice to do that, it's almost always in search of better economic opportunity, and so that was something else that kind of came up.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's security and safety in some cases. I think there are a variety when you have the opportunity, or you're forced to take advantage of the opportunity to make that choice. It's invariably economic or security or something like that. And for us it was exposure. And my mom was the one who drove that decision when we were youngsters. My dad, he was busy with work, and we'll go wherever we need to go, right? But my mother was the driver in that process.
Right. And I see a comment here from Bagda. I'm going to come to that in a minute. Rebecca, what I wanted to understand from you, given your experience, particularly in your when you were with UpGlow, what do newcomers or immigrants share as their top 2 positive aspects of their immigrant human experience that you've heard or you've experienced?
Yeah, so I was working, when I was at UpGlow, I was working with immigrants, refugees, and asylees who had backgrounds, professional backgrounds. So they were educated, they were experienced in their profession. When they got to the US, they were very eager to contribute professionally. And that was our role, was to help make that happen, to help break down the barriers to that happening. So, I think there was a very positive energy about contribution. I think in the US, there is certainly so many stories of immigrants who have not only succeeded, but they've moved technology forward hugely, for the world, for the US, but also for the world. So there's no shortage of stories of immigrants bringing their skills, bringing their education, bringing their experiences, and then creating something new and wonderful. So that was a really positive aspect of the people that I got to work with, and it was really a lot of fun. And then I'd also say, watching them experiences kind of this idea again of, do you want to be a melting pot, or do you want to hold on to your culture, and what do you hold on to, and what do you embrace? And I'm going to bring up gender again just because I love this story. But one of the very first workshops that I led at Upwardly Global, it was a huge group. It was like 50 immigrants and refugees and asylees from all over the world. And it was led by me, my boss, who was a woman, and the founder of the organization, who was a woman. And at the end of it, this young man stood up. I can't remember what country he was from, but it was from a country in Africa. And he just had his first baby in the US, a daughter. And he said, I just want to thank you all. And I want to say, you would never see this in my country, an organization led by women. And he was so excited about it. So again, I thought a lot of, and we'll talk about this later, there was sort of the flip side of it, but a lot of embracing of the positive sides of, the opportunity in the culture here.
Right. Yeah. And, so since we're talking about experience and also in the professional world, I want to actually go to both David and Malini really quick and get a sense of your experience, Malini, your experience of working in the US as a first generation American, and David, your experience as an expat worker. And then here's where I want to bring in the the intersectional lens as well, of what I would, in my view, an upper class male, a white male, that experience, but then you're as an expat worker. So those are the two different. I want to apply the same intersectional lens to both Malini and you. So Malini, going back, let's start with you as a first generation American, so female person of color. What's been your experience like?
So I think overall I've had a very positive experience, in the workplace, as with regard to the types of opportunities that I've received and the career mobility that I've been able to benefit from. And I will say that, going back to kind of the earlier comment was, I think my parents and grandparents had kind of laid the foundation for that. And to enable me to be in that position where I didn't have to worry about, these workplace dynamics so much, and things like that. Now, I think, there are, of course, going to be nuances even today, such as gender dynamics and leadership things and aspects and things like that. But for the most part, I've noticed, especially at multinational organizations with global teams, that there is a general sense of openness. Now, with that said, I can say that there might sometimes be some bias towards the ability or perceived ability. So, I am a person of Indian descent. I have a graduate degree in engineering. What do you mean we should allow, her to lead a team, or to be in a cross-functional team, and what are the implications there? And let's see. So I think some of those opportunities, I've had to pursue a little bit more assertively, and which is not necessarily in my DNA, but I've had to kind of learn to grow and adapt to those situations. So I think as a first generation American, I can definitely be a little bit more assertive about that than generations. So I could probably say that privilege versus anything else.
Right. Yeah. And so over to you, David. It's flowing. The conversation is flowing. So I'm just going to repeat the question, David. Your experience, again, the intersectional lens of gender, class, and race.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's different for everybody, and I've noticed a couple of comments in the chat box from Magda with some really interesting observations. And I think the lens through which you see these things is different depending on your circumstance, right? So I think for me, a male, maybe some people would describe me as white, although I am a mixture of lots of different things. An expatriate, somebody who sounds a little bit different than the traditional Canadian or American, brought with it, I think, opportunities that I was really afforded as a result. So my experience was, from a personal point of view, was positive. I benefited from those things, I would say. But I also had the opportunity, I think, because of some of the other experiences that I described, to really understand that not everybody was blessed with those opportunities or that perspective or that lens. And so I think because there were experiences that I had that were not so positive, I tended to try to adjust in terms of my leadership style. I tended to try to think about that as the recipient of the message or the information or the discussion, as opposed to just being the person delivering that message. And so I know part of the later conversation will be some of that. But I think I found myself as being fortunate in many ways. But looking in at others who clearly did not have the benefit of some of what I had, a native English speaker, an international background that I could leverage that for some of the work responsibilities that I had, things like that. So I think it's different for everybody, certainly.
Right. And speaking of being a native speaker of English, and I see Magda's comment here about accent. Yes.
I like to get Magda going. I'm teasing Magda.
Yeah, and and my personal experience has been when I first moved here, and I moved here because of my husband's job, and for the first couple of years I couldn't do anything here because of my visa status, and then when I did finally gain the required status to be able to work here, none of my experience from India mattered, right? So I had to start from scratch. And my first job here in the US was that of a barista in a coffee shop. My other barriers were that I didn't drive, and so I had to find something that I could walk to. And not all places in the US have public transportation systems that actually work. And so everything was these were some of my tactical challenges. And then the other challenges were, what can I put on my resume that'll actually get me noticed? I should probably change my name, because if they can't pronounce my name, how am I going to even get a phone call from anyone? How will they know that I can actually speak English? And so these were some of the challenges that nobody would talk about, but these are some things that you would experience in the workplace. And this is true for anyone moving to any country where you don't speak the language. So it's not just about moving to an English-speaking country. But I think that some things that I've realized over the past few years is how Eurocentric my upbringing has been, how colonized my mind has been as someone who's from India, and where there was so much focus on English-based education, and at the end of the day, it really didn't serve me much, right? Because I still had to prove it to get in the door. And so those were some of the challenges that I've experienced. And I've said to Rebecca, I wish I'd known you. I'd met you when I first moved to the US. And so there are some challenges that are really visible barriers, like mode of transportation, for instance, and some can be more unspoken rules around language, around accent, and things like that. So that's interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit slightly, and here's another question for the audience. What does the term refugee bring up for you? And let's do the chat of all again. So type up your responses, 30 seconds. I say go and hit the enter key. What does the word refugee bring up for you? Okay, let's go.
Sorry, I didn't wait. Whoops.
It's okay. It's all good. Loss, forced movement, mercy of others, leaving unfavorable circumstances. Yep. Struggle. Yeah. So I'm picking up, of course, there's sadness and loss, but also a sense of helplessness. And when we talked about moving for opportunity, or based on our choice, we talked about economic opportunity, and that's something we are forward-looking when we move by choice, and because of circumstance, when we are forced to move because of circumstance, there's also a lot that we're still looking in the rearview mirror. Because you really don't want to leave your home, but you have no other choice. It's a matter of survival. So given that, I wanted to again loop back to Rebecca. What are one or two things, Rebecca, that you've noticed in terms of the human experience for immigrants versus refugees?
Yeah, so there definitely, there's a difference. And we've talked about a lot of the positive, hopeful,
Mm,
optimistic, attitudes of immigrants who are coming. They're often coming because they fell in love with somebody in this country and chose to
mm,
move here for love and marriage, or they got offered a great job opportunity here. But for the refugees and the asylees, they didn't want to leave their home country. And many of them felt that a lot of the things that were mentioned in the chat, regret and loss. And they also had come through, in many cases, very traumatic experiences.
mm,
I remember standing with a doctor from Iraq at an event, and there was some kind of a noise, and he jumped and he said, "Oh, sorry, I have PTSD." And,
mm,
it's just sort of a fact of his life. But,
mm,
I felt terrible. I know that that so many of the refugees were experiencing things like that, and that we had just no idea what they had
mm,
been
mm,
through. Also, they didn't prepare to come to the US. They didn't necessarily have a choice in where they were resettled. And so they may or may not speak English. They
mm,
may have been learning English for a much shorter amount of time. And, Magda mentioned accent. And, the language barrier in the job search is huge. It's just huge. You have to learn to articulate all your professional knowledge in an entirely new language with all the nuance of the language of that profession too. So, it's a little easier if you're in technology because there's sort of a common language of technology, but imagine you're in communications, in marketing. That was so hard. Teachers had a really difficult experience because they were expected to be able to communicate very clearly to children. Again, this idea of an accent, well, will it be hard for the kids to understand that person? And so it really, really could get in the way. So it was um, a much harder lift. There was also the way they were responded to by other Americans. So when I started at Upwardly Global, it was 2009. There was a heavy influx of refugees from Iraq,
mm.
then from Syria, then from Afghanistan. And I apologize if you can hear that noise. There's some drilling outside my apartment. But so they had to deal with, bias about, their religion. Women who wore a headscarf had to worry about whether the message that was going to send. And our message was always wear your headscarf, use your name, don't change your name. But we were idealistic. And, sometimes I know that they had a different experience. And it was
Mm,
often something that was unsaid. So they couldn't say, I don't think that employer liked me because of this or that.
mm,
But they sensed it. And I often sensed it when I was talking to an employer and saying, with this great untapped pool of talent, people don't realize they're fully work authorized, they're educated, they're experienced. And sometimes I got this, great reaction and this interesting conversation. How can we work with you? And sometimes I got a light nod and, oh, that sounds so interesting, and a turn away. And I assumed I knew what that meant.
right. Two things that popped up for me when you shared that. Um, my experience as an ESL, English as a second language teacher, whenever I've had adult learners who are Arabic speakers, for the longest time, I didn't realize how hard it is for them to learn English because English, most other languages are left to right, whereas Arabic is right to left. And so just imagine as an adult, if you have to suddenly not only shift how you read, but everything. So reading and writing is much harder because your native language is written, it is oriented differently. And the other thing that I realized was that even when they use technology, if everything is in their native language, it was hard for them to also use technology because of the way the language was written. So they would have had their phones and everything, including their email, everything set up to Arabic. And so even if I had to help them out with their phones, I couldn't figure it out because I'm going back to my phone and everything is left to right. Um, and so as an adult, it's so much harder to get around that. That was something that I noticed much later in my ESL career. The other thing that you just talked about reminded me of the times when I first started working here, which is true for a lot of immigrants in the US, is you start putting your immigration status as your headline in your resume. So you'll say green card holder,
Fully work
H-1B visa.
authorized.
Yes,
No visa
legally authorized to
sponsorship
work for.
required. Yeah.
Exactly.
That was the
Exactly.
first thing we taught people was
Right.
no confusion on this because, and I did this as a recruiter in my HR career prior to Upglow. I would look at a resume and say, oh, we probably have to sponsor this person.
Exactly.
I'm sponsoring right now. So I would put it aside. I didn't know they might have been fully work authorized.
Yep.
And I just want to add, Rebecca, that I was actually told to do the same and to do that because of my name.
Wow.
So
yes,
wow.
That's
so it didn't matter
even
that
though
you're first generation
and
yes,
was all in the US.
And I was actually sharing with Meenakshi a couple of weeks ago that I am continually about my work status and due to the nature of my name and once I pronounce it a couple of times, I have to sometimes equate it. It's Malini like Melanie, so I have to kind of build a bridge there as well.
Yes.
Just like Kamala has to keep communicating how to say her name.
Oh, let's not go there.
I can't go there.
And I was thinking about something around immigration and work status, etc. Yeah, there's someone here who says I had to change my name in the US too, from Alexandra to Alex. I went that route and I came back because even my shorter name was not being pronounced correctly, which is Minu. And then people would say, is that Menu? Is that Minu? I said, no, let me just say Meenakshi. And then that was that. So LinkedIn has this feature where you can actually record the pronunciation of your name if you use a LinkedIn app. So that was one of the first things I did as soon as the feature was launched. Speaking of, immigration status and trying to find employment, etc., David, given your experience of, setting up customer contact centers in India, bringing in expat workers into the US or any other country that you've been in, because you've always worked with global teams, what's your 60 seconds on how do we balance globalization and local interests?
Well, so I said up front, I'm a globalist. So I declare my preference, right? But I think it is an important aspect. I think we have learned that there are some challenges associated with, offshore development centers. I think those challenges can be addressed with good business continuity plans, with good supply chain kinds of processes. But I really, in my own experience, I feel that the businesses that I have been associated with have benefited from a global strategy, an offshore center strategy, both from a pure software development perspective, but also beyond that in terms of more traditional customer-facing roles. I could talk lots of 60 seconds about this, but I'll just declare my preference and say that there is a benefit to businesses provided it is a part of their strategic plan and they invest in it in the appropriate manner. Doing that halfway is not going to work. And I've seen so many who kind of do it halfway and then blame the global strategy on the lack of success. And I also think that, from a pure international perspective, done right, the benefit can be both to the US company and country and or wherever it is, but also to the country where the work is being done. Again, done properly, done correctly. I'll stop there.
I know we've had several conversations around that, and actually, I want to actually to the kind of the second part of our discussion for today, because some of the other questions that we had planned to address have already been kind of talked about in terms of experience of immigrants versus refugees. So the whole choice versus circumstance piece, we've kind of covered that quite a bit. So I wanted to move to the second segment, if you will, and I would like to start with a question for the audience, really. And please use the chat window. Type in whenever you're done. No chat of all this time. What does the term cultural intelligence mean to you? One sentence, a few words. So when you hear the term cultural intelligence, what comes up for you? If you can respond in the chat window. And I wanted to share I'm going to put in a couple of links in the chat window for reference as well. Noticing, appreciating differences, awareness and respect for others' differences, being able to recognize the uniqueness of any of our relationships and smartly navigate that, compromise and novelty. That's interesting. Thank you. This is one of the links from a research and reading point of view. So the term cultural intelligence itself, a couple of professors introduced this concept, and it's also referred to as cultural quotient. And so professors Christopher Early and Sue Nang, they came up with this concept, and there's a book by the same name as well, came out in 2003. What was interesting to me in this was that what they talk about is in the book and otherwise is in their research is cultural intelligence is not about being an expert in any culture. It's not about that. It is about having the skills to navigate new environments with respect and confidence, and to make informed judgments based on observations and experience. So it is what was interesting to me, and what I started drawing a parallel to coaching, if you will. And I know there's a question in the Q&A box, and we'll get to that in a minute. So coaches really, you're not expected to be experts in any field, right? It's just trusting the process and the power of the coaching conversation. And so that was a parallel that I drew between cultural intelligence as a concept and coaching as a practice. That you really are not an expert in any culture, but knowing, and just like the responses that we've gotten here, the awareness of other cultures, knowing that there are differences, and being able to being aware of it and being able to understand it and knowing how to navigate it. So given that, there's an example that I want to read, and what was the intersectional aspect of it really popped up for me. So as an example, let's say you have, this is from the research work. Let's say you have a meeting with an Italian stockbroker. Does this person behave the way they do because they're Italian, because they're a stockbroker, or because they are an Italian stockbroker, or because they're millennial or an introvert? So it's likely it's that a combination of all these elements, right? So our brain is wired to put people or put anything in boxes. Our brain has to sort, classify, and put things in boxes. That's the only way it knows how to access that information when needed. So that's why unconscious bias is so natural. So when we are in cross-cultural teams or in a cross-cultural experience, how open-minded are we? And this is again drawing a parallel to a coaching conversation where there is the concept of unconditional positive regard and the respectful curiosity. and the empathy. And so I found a lot of parallels between those two worlds. So now with the panelists, we're going to move into a rapid fire round questions. So I'm going to so there's about 3 or 4 questions for each of you. And so we'll start with you, Malini, just because. What's your one-line definition of cultural intelligence?
I would say it's the ability to act appropriately and effectively with new cultures. And I would also say that it can be cultivated, or somebody can have an innate ability to do that.
Okay, cool. Next question. Name one visible action or behavior that can be described as culturally intelligent.
I think someone who has cultural intelligence can master any situation, where there are multiple cultural dynamics at play. And if they don't know, they're not afraid to ask with natural curiosity.
Is political correctness a myth or a fact? Why? Why not?
I'm going to go with myth because we can choose as to what we would be offended by, and we can choose to engage in a conversation and how we choose to do that.
Okay. Name one barrier to being culturally intelligent that you've experienced personally. Now, you could have been at the receiving end, or you could be the person with the barrier.
I think I mentioned a couple of the work status, having a different name. That those have been the 2 biggest things I would say that I've experienced personally.
Okay.
I think if it's a culture that I'm not sure of, yes, I have to also check myself and make sure that I'm doing due diligence and learning and displaying openness.
Right, absolutely. And I request the audience to please keep your questions coming either in the chat window or the Q&A box. We'll get to them very shortly. All right, so David, you're on the hot seat now. What's your one-line definition of cultural intelligence?
I think a willingness and a desire to be curious about others.
Great, thank you. One visible action behavior that can be described as being culturally intelligent.
Demonstration of respect for different points of view.
Okay. Is political correctness a myth, fact? Why not?
Boy, I hope that it's a myth, Melanie. I hope you're right.
Okay.
I can
see you have so much to say on that.
Well, yeah, I do, and I need to resist, but I hope that it is, and I hope that people choose to be curious enough that it goes away, and choose to understand the benefit of the tapestry. So I couldn't give you a one sentence answer there. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Name one barrier to being culturally intelligent that you've experienced personally.
Making assumptions about the person on the other end of the phone or at the other side of the desk.
Hmm.
And if you allow me 30 more seconds, I'll describe that.
Yeah.
I was involved in establishing an offshore development center in the south of India. And I remember meeting this young woman, about 32 years old, just a crackerjack. Didn't say anything on the phone. But when I met her in person, when I traveled to India, and I got to know her, and she got to know me and understood the importance that I saw in the need to participate, she just became like a shining star. And that was the person who was my go-to person in the organization there. We benefited so much, and she had the opportunity to benefit from a career progression point of view. But I think had I drawn the conclusion that she didn't have anything to say on the phone, so she didn't know anything, I would have been the one who had missed out on a great opportunity to work with somebody tremendous.
And I'm going to break the rules here just for a second. I have to piggyback off of the last statement that you made, particularly in today's world where a lot of us, almost all of us in the knowledge economy, work in virtual environments. It's harder to engage people that are, let's say, quote unquote introverts, or it's harder for them to engage in a virtual environment. So just assuming that if somebody doesn't speak up, speaking is not, verbal communication is not the only form of communication. So it's more and more, the onus is more and more on the leaders and the facilitators to ensure that all communication styles are accounted for in these environments. So I just
You're absolutely right. And so you saw me in this environment, but that's why I think that it really is important to do things like engaging on the video and looking so that you have the opportunity to look for signals, so that you have the opportunity to react to those signals, so that you have the opportunity to engage members of the team. I think it's absolutely critical.
Absolutely. All right, Rebecca, we'll start with the last question. One barrier to being culturally intelligent that you've experienced personally?
Tiredness. And I'm thinking of a specific example. The other day, and I'm working with a client in an immigration, in a nonprofit that serves an immigrant community, and directness is not part of their culture. And so I have somebody I'm working with who wanted me to solve a problem for him of communicating with somebody else. And he showed me the email that he was struggling with, and I didn't get it. It's like, just ask him directly what he wants, or just tell him directly what you want. And I know that's culturally challenging, but I was just so tired. So
yeah,
laziness or tiredness can be a barrier.
Fair enough. So, and what about political correctness? Myth or a fact?
So I'm going to be a little contrary here and say it's a fact that we have to deal with it. It's a fact that we have to deal with the frustration people feel about whatever they put in the category of political correctness, and what they, in a negative way, and it differs by people.
One visible action behavior that can be categorized or described as culturally intelligent?
Asking open-ended questions.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Asking open-ended questions.
Okay. There we go. Coaching again. Asking open-ended questions.
Coaching
fantastic.
Tool, yeah.
Yes. What's your one-line definition of cultural intelligence?
It's having self-awareness that you are coming from your own cultural perspective. Being aware of that.
Okay. Magda, do you want to do a rapid fire round with us?
I can. I wasn't ready to do it, but sure. I was in the background, Just
yeah. What do you think? One-line definition, cultural intelligence.
Cultural intelligence, just treating people like people.
Okay. One visible action behavior that can be called culturally intelligent.
Well, I was gonna say the open-ended questions. I like to, but I can't. Unconditional positive regard, approaching people with openness. I think every answer I'm gonna have is treating people like people.
Right. Fair enough. One barrier to being culturally intelligent?
Your own insecurities.
That's true.
I find that a lot.
Yeah. Political correctness, myth or fact?
I think, I actually don't understand political correctness, to be perfectly honest. Again, treat people like people. If you say something stupid, own it and apologize. I think if people were more culturally and emotionally intelligent, this would be a non-issue. It would just be able to communicate, and we'd have no wars, frankly. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Fair enough.
All for cultural intelligence.
So this actually is a fantastic segue to the next question that we have for David. What, in your opinion, how can we make use of cultural intelligence, since we've had so many definitions and discussions around it? How can we make use of cultural intelligence to uplift the immigrant human experience?
Yeah, I think that we need to. It's maybe saying the same thing in a different way, and maybe saying something that resonated with me that Magda just said, and that is, we need to look for similarities in people. At our core, there are things that we share, whether it's love of our children or love of our parents or being included on the team or whatever those things are. And I think if we sought out similarities more than we looked at differences, we would be so much further ahead. And then I would say one final thought is that those perspectives, particularly today when we're faced with so many different challenges and having to adjust our activities on a daily basis to cope with those situations, we do so much better if we are able to seek those similarities and understand that not everything is exactly the way we expect it to be or would like it to be, but does it make it wrong? I don't think so.
Thank you. A slight shift in the context. So Malini, given your experience in the world of technology and manufacturing, how important is cultural intelligence in an industry like manufacturing, for instance?
I would say, it's absolutely critical. Language and cultural differences can really make a downstream impact on a project when we think about that. And so if we take time to understand our team members, how they're communicating, asking the questions that we are, not making the assumptions and asking the questions accordingly. Even the idea of a sense of urgency that we might associate with certain cultures. I mean, even here, if I have a customer deadline, something that I'm concerned about, how do I as a leader portray that to my team in a way that makes them understand the urgency of the situation?
Malini, you there? Uh-oh.
I think
Hey, sorry, Malini, we lost you there for just a second. Can you repeat that last sentence?
Okay. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. So I was just saying I was on a project in Mexico City, and having grown up here, learning Spanish is one of the things that was a requirement. So I enjoyed the language. And part of learning the language, I had to learn about the culture. And there's a word in Spanish that means tomorrow, and it's mañana. But there's also a familiar cultural nuance there that how mañana for a native Spanish speaker doesn't necessarily mean the literal tomorrow. It could mean at a later date. And so it's that concept of learning, okay, we have a customer meeting tomorrow. Do you have the deliverables? Mañana, but it might not be, and I'm making light of the situation because it might not be taken so literally, but it's an attitude shift. And so understanding the language, I think, is very important to understanding the culture. And so I would say, in that situation, if a leader can learn a little bit about the local language and about some of those cultural aspects, I think that would serve everyone very well.
Absolutely. And I have so many stories. I'm not even going to go there. I can relate to that quite a bit. Magda says, like the South African just now, and David says, don't worry, be happy. That's the Islander in you. So bringing it home to coaching. So Rebecca, how does a coaching mindset, do you think, fit in with cultural intelligence and in the context of the immigrant experience?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's come up in our conversation about asking good questions and listening and positive regard. And I remember one of the coaches at Upwardly Global, who was one of the most successful coaches there. You know, and the coaches there were helping people with their job search. They were giving a lot of advice, but she never ever started with advice. She always started with a series of open-ended questions, and she just got a feel for who she was working with. So she didn't go into it with, okay, this person is from Ethiopia, therefore they are like this, this, and this. She just, got some sense of who they were, got some sense of their situation, their family, their anxiety level about the job search, and then she started her thing. So she was naturally doing the things we learn at Coacharya in coaching to get that situation started.
Absolutely. And your example, it touches one of the questions here in the chat window from Alexander. How does the immigrant status from the coach interfere or alter the process in the coach and client relationship? Very, very interesting. My take on that is that a lot of times, and to me, this is also related to language. A lot of times, English speaking, and this has been my experience, ability to speak English is somehow intertwined with level of competence or intelligence sometimes in some cultures as well. And so I've seen that play out as a barrier, not only in a coaching relationship, but in any other engagement as well. And I particularly am concerned about that playing out now that I'm a sole entrepreneur, and I'm trying to run my own consultancy. So I'm back to where I was, in my job seeking mode, wondering, can they pronounce my name? Do they know? What do I have to do to prove my English speaking skills? And that's why I do a ton of videos. Anyway, so the point is that to me, if I were to respond to your question, Alexander, it shouldn't. Now, whether if the client is really if the client doesn't treat the coach as a whole person, and in coaching we say you coach the person and not the problem. So if that's the problem, then possibly it comes out in the discovery call or the chemistry call, and both parties have the opportunity to take a decision on whether or not they want to proceed. That's my take on it. Rebecca, Magda, any thoughts?
Just again from my experience at Upwardly Global, we ended up hiring a lot of people from our own program, and including to be job search coaches. So, at first there was this thought, well, to teach somebody how to do the job search in the U.S., they have to have experienced it in the U.S. But what we found was we had people who were simply really fabulous natural coaches. And they could use the training for their own job search to be incredibly effective in coaching others. So we had immigrants coaching immigrants, and it worked out very well.
Yeah, that's a great story. Do you have anything to add, Magda? Okay. All right. In the last few minutes, I just wanted to do a quick, I wanted the audience to have the opportunity to do what I refer to as an action pledge. So I'm just going to put in a link in the chat window in a minute. Before that, I'm just sharing one more online resource on cultural intelligence. It's an article. It's a Forbes article. So the action pledge is as follows, and I'm going to put it in the chat window. It's a two-part question, and here's the link. It's a menti.com link. And the first question is, what is the one thing you'll start or continue to do to practice cultural intelligence? What's the one thing you'll start or continue to do to practice cultural intelligence? Thank you, Alexander. And you can also put it in the Menti link or the chat window. Either is fine. Okay. Thank you, Magda, for posting the link. So we have listen, observe, be open, and suspend judgment. Let me share my screen. So that's what we have. Treat people like people, unconditional positive regard, do more research. Yep, a lot of the coaching skills. That's what I'm seeing. See behind the mask. Okay, the second part of this question is, so stay on the same link and let me just move it over here. What's the one thing you will stop doing in order to be culturally intelligent? Same link. What's the one thing you'll stop doing? Okay, let's see. Lots around assumptions. That's interesting. If this were a word cloud, that would be the biggest word right now. Yes, using my own cultural set of values. Yes, talk about the whole concept of being ethnocentric, right? So then you reference everyone based on your what you think is right. So it looks like everybody's talking. Most people are talking about assumptions. So that's great. I did want to. Are there any other questions or comments in the chat? I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Well, that's all we had. And I want to do a quick 30-second parting words from all the panelists. Let's start with David.
Sorry, it just took me a minute to unmute there. This is incredibly important. Our world is changing, whether we like it or not. I think we better start to embrace it. I think we better start to think about taking advantage of the opportunities that it presents. And we need to think and look and act and look forward as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror. And as long as we continue to think about what went before and think about it in a positive manner, which it always has some, but not all, we run the risk of never really taking advantage of what's in front of us. So for me, that's the important aspect here, is that we really have an opportunity as a society, as a workforce, as all of those things.
Thank you, David. Rebecca?
Well, I think that given climate change, migration is going to continue to be huge. It's going to
Mm.
happen all the time for many reasons. And that the more we can adapt cultural intelligence, the better off we'll be.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Malini?
I think with globalization and like Rebecca said, people moving around due to choice and circumstance, it's going to be cross-functional teaming and cross-cultural work is going to be a larger and larger part of the way we do daily business. So from a leadership coaching standpoint, I think it's going to be increasingly important, not only the things that we just said about asking the right questions, but also doing all of these things to build trust in our teams, because that's the only way that leaders will be regarded, and that's the only way that work will be able to get done.
Thank you. Magda, do you have anything to add before I
always have something to add. I think we should not let the past be a crutch. We should acknowledge what happened, but you know what? It's in the past. Let's focus on the future and realize just how amazing diversity is. I mean, would you rather have one ice cream flavor or 10? Even if one of those ice cream flavors doesn't suit me, you know what? I still want to try it to know that I don't like it. No, just kidding. All cultures are interesting, but diversity is great. I mean, honestly, as I was listening to you guys, I was trying to think about a time when I was like, man, I wish there were fewer points of view, or I wish that I didn't meet this person, or that they had one less cultural aspect. Like, I literally cannot think of a time where I thought it was a bad thing. Diversity is great. Embrace it, focus on the future, not the crappy way that we behaved as a world in the past.
Thank you for that. And what I wanted to share is that a few things. I love bullet points. Number one, diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice that we make. And we have to be intentional about choosing inclusion, choosing to be inclusive. Number two, the future, it belongs to everyone, so everyone has to be involved in creating it. And number three, and it just escaped my brain. This was about, one of Rumi's, and I can't remember the quote. I think it's something to the effect of, yesterday I wanted to change the world. I thought I knew everything and I wanted to change the world. And today I'm wise and I want to change myself. And I think I'm paraphrasing it, but it is Rumi. So I think that everything that we have around us is what helps us to be successful as the human species altogether. So with that, thank you everyone for hanging on, and thank you for being with us today. And if I'm sure the recording will go up on YouTube. If you want to chat with us, please do feel free to reach out to us to any of us on LinkedIn. And or through the Coacharya YouTube site. Over to you, Magda. Thank you. And thank you, panelists. I completely forgot. I know you guys so well that I completely forgot. Thank you. Thank you for making the time.
Yeah, thank you, panelists. And I mean, actually, you keep throwing me in the spotlight, literally. I was literally gonna be in the background. But thank you so much to everyone who attended. Thank you so much to the panelists. Apologies if I scared anybody at any point with my comments, because I feel passionately about a lot of things. And this is like, top 3, because boy, oh boy, do I have some stories. Perhaps another time. But this, Awake, Aware, Arise is all about surfacing different points of view and surfacing the kinds of issues that we may not be aware of in our daily lives, and some that we're acutely aware of, and maybe we're sick of not having solutions for them. So Awake, Aware, Arise is just all about that awareness and arising into action and just doing something different, starting with ourselves. So thank you so much for participating today, and for all the other sessions as well. We have a few more to go, including what will be an excellent closing session on Thursday. So I hope to see all of you there. But even if I don't, that's okay, because like Meenakshi said, this is all going to be on YouTube. It's going to live forever. It's going to increase and be useful forever. So please share, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell all your diverse neighbors, because the more you spread the word, the better off we'll be, right? Diversity.
Absolutely. And just one last thing, David, Rebecca, and I, we are collaborating again next week. We are doing a global virtual conference on unpacking intersectionality, and both David and Rebecca are parts of different panels. And you can check out the details on LinkedIn. You can connect with any of us on LinkedIn. It's a 3-day global conference, 6 different sessions, and I can just plug in the website here if I can.
Excellent.
Yep,
and another small plug, there's also another program that we are doing as Coacharya for those of you who are coaches. So Philippe Rosinski, who some of you may have seen a session we had with him a couple weeks ago, he'll be doing a 30-hour masterclass on culture and coaching. Yes. So this is a topic that you're interested in, and you need either renewal credits for your ICF or EMCC, or you are going for your first credential. Like with all of our programs, that one is accredited for 30 hours, so you can use it towards your first credential or renewal. And that starts end of January. It's on our website, coacharya.com/events. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. We'll be back
everyone.
here on this exact link in 55 minutes with David Peterson and David Goldsmith, talking about being intentional, mindful. Yep, lots of Davids. Lots of Davids, you're right. This is like our 6th David. Yeah, we'll be talking about intentional and mindful coaching. So hope to see you guys here in about 54 minutes.
Hey, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.